Deep remorse, but no apology. Japan's nationalist prime minister's words on war crimes committed during World War II during a joint session of the U.S. Congress. We'll ask our panel if Shinzo Abe has lived up to the bill. Some papers before the speech said it would be the speech of his life. At the White House Tuesday evening, his hosts putting aside the events of 70 years ago, welcoming Abe with open arms as the man who's ramping up military spending, helping the U.S. contain China's growing muscle in the region. We'll see why Japan's partial break with its pacifist past is proving more popular in Washington than in Tokyo, countering China at the center of Obama's Asia pivot, hence a visit that matters so much for the region. And it's not just defense. We'll also be asking about that strong U.S. push for an Asia-Pacific free trade deal. Today in the France 24 debate, Abe in America. With us to talk about it from Washington, Bruce Stokes, director of the Global Economic Attitudes at the Pew Research Center. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Great to be here.
Also in Washington, D.C., Kei Shimizu, who teaches at Columbia University. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Valérie Niquet, senior researcher at the Foundation for Strategic Research, and France 24's very own Yuka Royer. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Now, again, with the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II coming up, everybody was waiting during that speech before a joint session of Congress to hear the exact words spoken by Shinzo Abe when it came to atrocities committed in Asia during World War II, words he chose to speak in English.
Post-war, we started out on our path, bearing in mind feelings of deep remorse over the war. Our actions brought suffering to the peoples in Asian countries.
Kei Shimizu, was that as far as he could go, or should he have said sorry?
I think that there's two sides to the story. From a domestic Japanese audience perspective, this may have been as far as he could go, but it still sent a strong message to the international community and, of course, the American audience that he was committed to a peaceful world and Japan's contribution to continued peace by upholding the official apologies that previous leaders have said before him. And so in many ways, I think it was a balanced statement that was, pushed the limits of what he could do domestically, but made significant advances in terms of his message to the international and, of course, the American audience.
And does that signal that this is it? That was the line when it comes to what we'll hear in speeches that'll come up with commemorations of the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II?
Again, that the important factor here is who his audience is. I think that the main message will be the same, that Japan is committed to peace and prosperity, not just in the Asia Pacific, but globally, and that Japan would like to play a bigger role in that aspect. But I think that the message is clear, that Japan is committed to peace.
Yuka Royer, how did the Japanese Prime Minister seem to you up there on?
I don't know whether he really pushed the limits when addressing the Japanese domestic audience, because he has very much stayed pretty much in line with what he has already said. Most recently in Indonesia, earlier this month, he said that he used the same words there as well, deep remorse. And many critics have been putting pressure on him to apologize in his own words, but he has repeated what he has said in the past many times, that he will uphold the official Japanese government's position. So in a way, I don't think he was very courageous when it came to address in the Japanese audience. At the same time, though, Professor Shimizu is absolutely right that he did manage to send a strong message that Japan was committed to peace and that it wanted to become more of a global player in keeping peace.
Now, we're going to talk about the future, Valérie Niquet, but how much is the past a hindrance for Japan?
Well, I would say it is less and less so when you look at Asia, because actually you have a strong opposition based on past atrocities in China and in South Korea. But when you look at all the other countries in Asia, in Southeast Asia, in the Philippines, for instance, where the role played by Japan during the war was not very good neither, actually everybody wants for Japan to play a stronger security role in the region and is not focusing so much on past histories. So the problem with Abe, of course, he had pressure from his right wing in Japan. Some people wanted him to go back on the previous declaration by Murayama, for instance. So he didn't do that. So in a way, this is already a kind of victory for the peace camp in Japan. But the most important point on difficulty for Japan today and for Abe is that they think that if they even if they apologize to China or South Korea for internal political reasons in China or South Korea, it will not mean that the relations would get much better at the time being. So I think that considering all this, Abe thinks that he did what he had to do to an American audience, which is also very important, to people who are ready to accept a better role for Japan in Asia, and he will not go too far to accommodate China or South Korea.
Bruce Stokes, do you agree with that? There's not much mileage for Abe out of a full apology when it comes to China and South Korea.
Well, I think it depends whether you talk short-term or long-term. I agree that, for example, our survey showed that Japanese believe they've apologized enough. And in fact, there are 15% of the Japanese public who believe there's nothing to apologize for, which is the hardcore nationalist part of the population that doesn't see why this is necessary. I agree that in Korea and China, 98% of people in our survey in Korea believe that Japan has not apologized sufficiently. 78% in China believe they haven't apologized sufficiently. There's probably nothing that Abe could have said today that would turn those numbers around. Similarly, in the United States, 6 out of 10 Americans believe that Japan has apologized enough or there's nothing to apologize for, which means, why are you asking me this question? So there is no great demand from an American audience that he do more. In the short run, what they did probably was sufficient for Japan. But I do think that this remains, as a result, a neuralgic issue. It sends signals that in Japan, this is still a political issue 7 decades after the war. There is, contrary to what the Germans have done, where a German chancellor went to the Warsaw Ghetto and got down on his knees and apologized for what had happened in Warsaw and in the war and the Holocaust. No Japanese official has even come close to that. And I think as a result, this issue will continue to be something that can be exploited, and it is exploited, by the Korean and Chinese governments.
Yuka Waye, how do Japanese people feel when people evoke the German way they've handled World War II?
First and foremost, I don't think many people know how the Germans handled the post-war apology issue. But contrary to what German politicians have done, what the Japanese politicians are doing, they still continue to do, is they still every year continue to visit the Yasukuni Shrine, knowing fully well that would provoke, that would anger China and South Korea even more.
Let's remind people of that. Just last week, ahead of his trip to America, Abe sending a gift, a potted evergreen shrub, to that shrine in Tokyo, a Shinto memorial to Japan's war dead. These are images from 2013. where he went in person. Among those were honored at that memorial are convicted war criminals from World War II, Yuka.
Yes, convicted war criminals indeed. There are 13 Class A war criminals that are honoured at their shrine, but also thousands of other unknown soldiers who are honoured there. And I think the official position of the Prime Minister and other politicians is that we need to pay respect to those who fought for the country, to protect their country, and paid with their lives.
Now, Bruce Stokes, let me ask you something, because we got a lot of reactions on social media when we said we would be talking about this, and some people saying, why should the Japanese apologize? It's not just Americans, by the way, saying France should apologize for its colonial past, and also, why not the Americans, they say, apologize for Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
What is very interesting, this is an issue that comes up in conversations with Japanese all the time. And I think what's interesting in our survey, our most recent survey, is that the American point of view on the whether Hiroshima and Nagasaki were justified is actually changing. The Japanese are increasingly convinced it was unjustified. They've always thought that, but now it's even more Japanese believe that. And the percentage of Americans who believe it was justified is down significantly. It was 85% right after the war. It's now 56%. And among millennials, it's only 47%. So there's a trend in the American population to question that action that didn't exist previously. And it is a tricky issue because next year, President Obama will be going to Japan. The Japanese would like him to go to Hiroshima as part of that visit. And the question will be a challenge for the White House speechwriters, just as it was for Abe speechwriters. What words do you choose to say if you go to Hiroshima? And how do you talk about that action in a way that maybe apologizes for it, probably not apologizes for it, because most Americans still don't think we need to apologize, but by the same token tries to say, shows remorse in Abe's wording, and how do you move forward from that point?
Keishimuzu, do you think Barack Obama should be borrowing from the speech we heard earlier in the day from Shinzo Abe?
I certainly think that President Obama would benefit greatly from borrowing the message of peace. That is, Hiroshima has not only been a symbol of the destruction of war, but also the building of peace, and many of its peace memorials are exactly that. And by visiting Hiroshima, I hope that President Obama will take that opportunity to join Prime Minister Abe in pushing an agenda of peace and prosperity in the Asia-Pacific region.
But should he call his bluff and issue a formal apology?
I don't think that would be the message that would give him the greatest bang for the buck, so to say. Apologizing does not necessarily build upon a sort of a future of peace in the region, and so I don't agree with that, but that's my personal opinion.
Valérie Niquet?
Well, actually, yes, the Hiroshima issue is a very long issue, and I don't know what should President Obama's position be. But I would like to come back to the example of Germany. One must not forget that the strategic situation in Europe is very different. I mean, Germany started to come back to think about its past. After the Cold War, it was much easier when, after the fall of the Soviet Union, when Poland was ready also to accept Germany as a normal partner, which was not the case during the Cold War at all. And in Asia, the situation in Japan is very different. There is no strategic alliance.
We all remember the 1984 visit by the German Chancellor to the battlefield of Verdun with the French president.
Yes, but it's a little bit different. Actually, the strategic situation in Asia today makes. I'm not saying that Japan should not apologize or repent. Of course not. But I think that the strategic situation in Asia makes these apologies much more difficult to be accepted than was the case in Germany, especially after the end of the Cold War. And to come back to repentance, as we say in French, I don't know the name
Repentance.
in English, repentance, it's only a few days ago that for the first time a French member of government went to Sétif, where hundreds of people have been killed after Second World War. This is all colonial past, and until very recently, it was very difficult to talk about it and to apologize about it.
Yuka Hoye, one area where the Germans and the Japanese are alike is that they have, from the war, this pacifist streak. So here we are this Wednesday before the U.S. Congress, and the Prime Minister saying we're going to beef up our mandate when it comes to helping out militarily the Americans in the region. How much of a break with the past is that?
It is a significant break from the past. The Prime Minister has said that it does not mean that Japan will be ready to go to war and wage war against other countries. However, he has said that times have changed, and also it is that the pacifist constitution in Japan is the one that was drawn up by American occupiers during just after the war, and it was imposed by the Americans. But over time, it has the relationship between Japan and the United States is that the U.S. has started seeing Japan as more and more of a burden in terms of its military budget, and it wants Japan to pay its fair share of the military budgets and contributions. So that is what Prime Minister is trying to do. However, people who have experienced Hiroshima and Nagasaki and other air raids during the war, they are genuinely concerned that this stance, this right-wing stance, the increasingly conservative stance by the Abe government, there's a genuine fear of where it will take the country to.
All right, this call by the Prime Minister to spend more, to help out the Americans more, well, that's music to the ears of his host, like at last night's White House official banquet. Stay with us. We're going to see how it's playing in public opinion when we come back in the France 24 debate.